এতিয়া number পাইছে নে
আহা নাই স্যার
হা নাই আচ্ছা প্রেজেন্ট টু মেসেজ টু পাইছিলো মই এক সেকেন্ড ৰবা আগো কৰো
yes
ৰবা এক সেকেন্ড share I waited পাইছা না এটা
yes sir
আচ্ছা কোবা যে কেতিয়া আৰম্ভ কৰিব লাগে
yes sir we're just starting sir please mute your microphone for just a second
yes
Good morning, everyone. Esteemed colleagues, welcome to the second day of interdisciplinary refresher course on curriculum and pedagogy. So today in the first session, we'd like to invite Professor Prasanta Kumar Das, Dean, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Tezpur University, for the first session on NEP2020 and Decentering English in Higher Education. Before going to start the session, I would like to introduce Sir to you. He has did his MA from Delhi University and PhD from Guwahati University. He joined the Department of English, Tezpur University in July 2001. His areas of interest are Indian writing in English and American literature. He was awarded with the prestigious Fulbright Nehru Senior Fellowship at Harvard in 2012. Professor Das is closely connected to Teaching Learning Center, Tezpur University. He served as the first director of TLC and currently is the chairperson of Advisory Board of Teaching Learning Center. We welcome you, sir, to this session, and I request you to start the session.
Okay, thank you, Sapna, for that introduction. And also, generally, I'd like to thank TLC for inviting me to give this talk today. And I consider it a privilege to be addressing so many young professionals, many of you who are at the beginning of your careers. All right, then. So let me now get started. And my topic is decentering English in connection, and this is with reference to the National Education Policy. So I have some slides for you, and I will bring up the slides and I will comment on the slides. And I think we should also make some time for questions that that you may have to ask. I should tell you straight away that I will be presenting a problem, and I don't have any easy solutions to this. And I don't even know what the solution is, but I want to share some thoughts with you. I'd also like to say that this is not just for teachers of English. I have been a teacher of English all my life, almost all my life now. And but what I'm going to say actually concerns all of us, because the simple fact is higher education in India is conducted in English. So whether you teach physics or economics or any other subject, you're actually teaching in English. And why are you teaching in English and the associated problems with that? These are things that I want to reflect on. During this refresher course, you will have very many different faculty members coming and talking to you. And some of them will be coming with great expertise in the areas. And there will be a certain domain knowledge that they will communicate to you. My lecture is not of that kind. But I sort of console myself with the thought that perhaps it will be a little thought-provoking. And sometimes what happens is you don't reflect on certain things because we've normalized them. But teaching in English in higher education in India, a situation that has existed since 1835, and this is 2021, that is something that we have, people have been very disturbed by some of the implications of this. But at the same time, as I said, we've also normalized it. We don't stop to think about it. And I think all of us need to think about it. So with these preliminary comments, let me bring up my slide and have patience as I go through my slides. And as I said, at the end, you can come in with your reflections, your observations, your disagreements, anything else that you might want to say. So I'm bringing up my slide, first slide. Okay, so that is just the title of my lecture there. And let me move on quickly to the next slide. Yes. Here we are. Let me read from my slide. A primary goal, as stated in the National Education Policy 2020, is to provide access to the socially economically disadvantaged by increasing the gross enrollment ratio in higher education to 50% by the year 2035. This means that there will be many first-generation students, especially in our public universities. So, education is something that provides social mobility. Education is connected to the idea of meritocracy. And in India, this is, I think, a very laudable goal that we have, that we want to expand the universities so that people who have not had access to higher education before and all the opportunities that higher education makes available. So people like that, from that backgrounds, underprivileged backgrounds, will now be entering the university. Also, let us remember that until recently, even women were not actually allowed into universities. The old universities, Oxford or Cambridge, it's only recently, not more than 100 or 150 years ago, 100 years ago actually, that women have actually been provided access to higher education. Now, India as a young nation with all its idealism came up with this idea that the arrangements that we make in our country should benefit the underprivileged. So this is a very laudable goal. And I think most of us would be committed to this goal. See, sometimes we complain that our classrooms are becoming too big. There are various quotas. But then, though this increases your work, on the other hand, you also realize that this is, after all, the aim of education for all. However, this laudable goal has a problem, and that is the second item on my slide. However, the prevalence of English in Indian higher education poses a challenge to this democratic goal. Now, what is the challenge? The challenge, of course, is that English is actually the language of the elite. And English, your proficiency in English depends on your social background, kind of school you've been to. Now, in this talk, we will consider the challenge of displacing English by looking at the historical factors that led to its imposition and dominance in colonial India, and the social, political, and economic factors responsible for its continuance in a post-colonial nation. Now, I have the word post-colonial in red because we are a post-colonial nation. The great struggle for Indian independence, what was that struggle about? It was about throwing off the British, of course, British rule, but then also the idea that a new society that would come up in India, the new nation, would also get rid of any lingering colonial influences or any residue of colonial rule. So we are a post-colonial nation. But as I said, as I have been suggesting, we continue with English. The English was imposed by the British, and it continues in a post-colonial nation. So what is the reason for that? And displacing English is easier said than done. That's one of the things that I want to tell you. That displacing English, I think we all of us realize the need to displace English from its importance. But it's easier said than done. So let me now go to the history of it, because there is a history. But before that, this is from the new the National Education Policy, the new one, 2020. And successive attempts at reforming Indian education have looked at this problem of English. Now, the new one, the policy that we have currently, it says, I'm quoting, wherever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond, will be in the home language / mother tongue / local language. Thereafter, the home or local language shall continue to be taught as a language wherever possible by both public and private schools. So this refers to primary education and also secondary education, I think, and clear recognition here that it is desirable that education should be, the medium of instruction should be in the language that the child speaks at home. And the national education policy also acknowledges the power of multilingualism and the power of language. We are a multilingual society, a multilingual country. All of us naturally speak 2 or 3 languages. And this is unlike in Europe, say, where there are many countries which are monolingual, simply one language, and you can get by with that one. Not so in India, we may speak English in the workplace. When we go home, we speak in our mother tongue, mostly, though that situation is changing now, with our children, with family members, with our servants. It's another language that we employ. When we go to the market, again, another language. So all of us are naturally multilingual. And the National Education Policy 2020 shows a desire to harness the cognitive benefits of learning in home language or mother tongue. So there has been some work done on this, and the child seems to learn better if he or she is taught in the home language or mother tongue. So all of this is there in the National Education Policy. Now I'm coming to higher education. Now, in higher education, what as I was suggesting a few minutes ago, we can actually draw a straight line from that moment in 1835, when the English Education Act was introduced, to this moment, because here I am speaking to all of you in English. I was told that there are a huge number of participants in this course, and you are from all over the country. And English obviously is useful because I'm able to speak to you. But then it is also a strange situation, is it not? And this is what I meant by normalizing a situation. That something that was introduced by the British in 1835, that continues until this moment, 2021, that higher education has been conducted in our country in English. And the first universities, as you know, were set up in Calcutta, Madras, Bombay. This was in 1857. And so, since we continue with English, I put it in red there to highlight this point, that there is definitely a legitimate concern whether English in post-1947 India is a continuance of colonial ideology and agenda. Now, the British introduced English in India with a very definite aim and program. And that is what I'm coming to in my next slide. But the disturbing thought is that we continue with that. So here's the background. And this is something that I think all of us should know. And students, if you happen to belong to a discipline like English, or if you belong to education, sociology, disciplines like that, then you'll be well aware of this. But if you belong to other disciplines, you may not know this history. But I think every modern Indian should really know this history about the introduction of English in India. What are the circumstances? You have the Charter Act. This is when the East India Company was ruling India. At that point, India was ruled by the East India Company. The Crown had not yet taken over. That would happen later in 1857. But the East India Company was ruling large parts of India. And in the Charter Act, there was a provision to keep 1 lakh of rupees aside for education. 1 lakh of rupees in those days was a lot of money. And what was this? This was the budget. Okay, so 1 lakh of rupees kept aside for education in India. So the East India Company assumed some responsibility for the education of Indians. And there was a stipulation. What was the stipulation? That this 1 lakh rupees was to be spent, to be annually applied to the revival and improvement of literature and for the introduction and promotion of a knowledge of the sciences. So this is what the provision was. What it didn't say was what literature. What literature? There's something about the promotion of science. But then again, that issue is there was also Indian science. There were the Indian knowledges of the time. And improvement of literature, what literature? Sanskrit, it's not specified. And that led to a controversy. There were two schools of thought, and this controversy is referred to as the Anglicist, Orientalist controversy. The Anglicists were the people who said that, well, if you're going to spend money on education in India, let it be on Western education and let it be on English as a medium. And there were the opposing people, the Orientalists. Now, these Orientalists were supporters of Indian knowledge, and they were admirers of Indian literature, Indian culture generally. One of them was Horace Wilson, and who, as you can see from my slide, was a translator of P.K.Das. So these were Englishmen who had devoted themselves to the study of Sanskrit classics and who had admiration for Indian culture, Indian literature. And they were the ones who were saying that let this money be spent on Indians' own knowledge, their literature. Macaulay, whose name I also have on the slide, was, of course, famously opposed to this. And Macaulay was a very staunch supporter of the Anglicist idea that let the money be spent on Western knowledge and on English as a medium of instruction. And this controversy went on for a long time, for almost 2 decades. It was settled by the English Education Act of 1835. It was settled by Macaulay, but that was in 1835. But before 1835, in 1817, Hindu College came up in Calcutta. Now, Hindu College I have referred to here as a hybrid institution. What I mean by this is that Hindu College came into existence not only because of the efforts of the British, it came into existence also because of the efforts of Indians, the Bengali gentlemen, the Bhadralok class of Bengal. They wanted a college in which their sons, not daughters, mind you, because in the patriarchal culture, you didn't send your daughters to school or college. But for the Bhadralok class, their sons, they wanted English education for their sons. And there were some practical reasons for that, of course. There were opportunities in the East India Company's administration. You could get jobs if you knew English, if you are conversant with their ways of living and culture generally. So there was a real demand on the part of Indians, and in Hindu College came into existence. And one of the early supporters of this college, Hindu College, he later on withdrew because he was a bit controversial, and he decided that it would not be a good idea for him to be in the forefront of this cause. But one of the strong supporters of Hindu College was a great Indian called Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I said great Indian because I want to stress that many of these people who supported English in India at that time were actually patriotic people. They were not unpatriotic people. And Ram Mohan Roy submitted a petition to the British authorities. And in this petition, he actually demanded English education. And this is what he said. He said, "We are filled with sanguine hopes that this sum," referring to that 1 lakh of rupees, "would be laid out in employing European gentlemen of talents and education to instruct the natives of India in mathematics, natural philosophy, chemistry, anatomy, and other useful sciences, which the nations of Europe have carried to a degree of perfection that have raised them above the inhabitants of the other parts of the world." Now, you know that if you have seen Raja Ram Mohan's pictures, this was a man who dressed in Persian clothes. And he was one of those cosmopolitan Indians who knew Persian, who became proficient in English, and who knew his Sanskrit classics very well. And this is a man who's actually demanding European education. And he wants the natives of India to learn mathematics, natural philosophy, chemistry, anatomy, and other useful sciences. So he's clearly on the side of Western science. And why does he want this? He has a competitive attitude. Notice, he says that this is what has led to development in Europe. Europeans have come to a very high degree of development. As he says, they have raised themselves above the inhabitants of the other parts of the world. So Raja Ram Mohan Roy is actually demanding that same education, the same technology, if you like. So to bring Indians on par with Englishmen. So he has this competitive attitude. It's not a slavish attitude. He's demanding. And the English Education Act came into existence in 1835. Now, what happened was Lord Bentinck, whose name I also have on my slide, was the Governor General from 1828 to 1835. He had begun the process of appointing Indians who knew English to subordinate posts in the colonial administration as an economizing measure. What I mean by this is that it made no sense, no economic sense, to bring an Englishman from England to Bengal or to India for some lowly post. See, it made much more sense, economic sense, to train Indians for the lower subordinate post, clerical post, that kind of post. It made sense to train them in India, train Indians in India to speak English, to write English. And so he was already inclined to introduce English. But then he decided to set up a committee. When you have a tricky problem, you set up a committee. And in his case, it was a one-man committee. He asked Macaulay, Thomas Macaulay, who was a famous historian too, that you settle this issue, settle this Anglicist and Orientalist controversy. So Macaulay then wrote his report. He studied the situation and he gave his report. And he was actually already, I think, he was biased, definitely. Now, Macaulay had sheer contempt for Indians and Indian education, or Indian branches of knowledge. And he wrote a very powerful report, very powerful in its effects, because after he gave his report, he submitted his report in 1835, and immediately soon after that, it became an act, the English Education Act of 1835. Now, Macaulay is somebody we love to hate because he had these very contemptuous things to say. But the thing to notice about him and to notice about the imposition of English is that it was a very definite program, a very definite program. And I use the word program almost in the computer sense, computer program, because what he said was, I have it on my slide, but before that, I just want to clarify, read what's on top. First, the second item, Mauchly's contempt for Indian knowledge and culture. So he didn't know Sanskrit, he didn't know Arabic. Nevertheless, he had no hesitation in declaring that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So an extremely dismissive attitude towards Indian or Eastern knowledge, and very sure, very, very confident, imperial kind of assumption that Western education is definitely any day superior, Western knowledge superior to anything that you find in the East. And then his theory led to what was later called the filtration theory. His report led to the filtration theory, or the percolation of English education from the higher classes down to the masses. And this is what he said: it is impossible for us, with our limited means, to educate the body of the people. Yes, in any time in India, at any point, there were much fewer Englishmen than there were Indians. And he said it's not possible to educate the masses in English. Simply cannot do it. We do not have the resources. Then what should we do? Next line. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. So you cannot educate the masses. So what you can do is you can take a small class on top, and through this class, you can carry out your program, which was what? to create a class of Indians, class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. This is a programming part. That through Western education, through English, we create a class of Indians who will be westernized and virtually Englishmen, except in skin color. And these are the people who will then influence the rest of their compatriots. This is the filtration theory. Slowly you disperse your ideology through a class of people like this. To that class, we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich these dialects, those dialects with the terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population. So these Indians, these westernized Indians, would probably go and write books, but then what they would have read in their Western books, they would try to recreate in the vernacular. So this is the program. This is the program. And the disturbing thought is that, that people like you and me are probably still carrying on this program. That is a disturbing thought. That we are the Indians, we who are in higher education, we who teach in English, that are we still carrying on Mauchly's agenda? That is the disturbing part, the part that I have been indicating throughout. And that is why the question of, can we decenter English? Can we displace English from higher education? Now, of course, this was quite extreme. And then it was not just Mauchly, but later on there were other attempts at looking at Indian higher education and Indian education in general. There was something called Wood's Dispatch in 1854. And I have it on my slide. The important parts are in red. So as a result of Wood's Dispatch, there was a decision to establish big universities in India on the model of London University. And it would happen in the presidencies. So you had Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras selected as sites for Indian universities. And there was also an attempt to sort of mitigate the extremism of Mauchly. So there was that idea that let the Indians also be given their training in their mother tongue. And the last one, the medium of instruction at the primary level was to be vernacular, while at the higher levels it would be English. So, the British were not thinking about introducing English at the primary level. For them, English was to be used in higher education, but not at the primary level. Now, this is something I have in a later slide. I have this. This is something that we Indians have done post 1947. What we have done is we have, unlike the British, we have introduced English at the primary level also. The sheer expansion of private English medium schools completes a project or initiates a project that the British didn't start. And following this Wood's Dispatch, you have the first universities in Calcutta, in Bombay, in Madras, and then, of course, in Punjab, and the University in Allahabad in 1887. Now, what was the system that this English Education Act destroyed? Well, India is a diverse country, so this situation would be rather different in the same in all parts of the country. But from Bengal, we have this evidence that village schools were there for boys from 5 years to 8 years. After that, the education was carried out by this guru-disciple relationship that you had, essentially a tutor-mentor kind of a situation. And you had a small number of students, really, and usually the male upper class, definitely not women, not girls. And it was not in the vernacular languages, but in Sanskrit. And there was no study of science and all that. It was more the study of the Vedas. So this is if you're curious to know what pre-colonial education at the primary level was like, well, this is what it was like. And as I have been saying, I have said a couple of minutes ago, Mauchly's English medium education was not designed to kick in until Indian boys had been through primary school in their mother tongue. So there was that separation of the primary school and higher education, English in higher education, not in the primary school. And what we did, as I was saying, in independent India chose to keep and extend its large sector of private schools. And many of these private schools then opened primary sections designed to teach in English. And so for the first time in India, you had children getting all their schooling in English. Now, we have this democratic, urge. Our country has that. And I'm not saying this in any irony. Like, one of the most admirable things about Indian democracy is precisely this. Indian democracy is not perfect, of course. But then, it also has its idealism. And then sometimes you have these acts that attempt to correct social inequities. And here we had in 2009 the right of children to free and compulsory education. And by virtue of this act, all private schools are supposed to keep 25% of their seats for the economically weak sections, children whose parents earn less than a lakh. Now, I also have a sort of unrelated idea there, that if you're thinking that we need English, and often the argument is that we need English, we can't really give it up. There are countries that seem to manage without English. Iceland, I believe, has only 3 lakh people. Recently, I read somewhere. But they function only in their own language, Icelandic. And they've been able to write textbooks in their local language. Many of them learn English, but as a second language. And the literature written in Icelandic is actually very good. Sometimes you have this, idea that there are no textbooks available in vernacular languages. So maybe that's one reason why you should keep going on with English. And we know about the endangered languages. In the Northeast, for instance, we have many tribal languages that are vanishing or have vanished. But you could also argue that even languages, powerful languages like Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, are losing ground to English. But anyway, let me come back to my to the history part. Now, of course, English has had its opponents, some great Indians. We've seen how Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a champion for English, but then you've also had many great Indians against English. And Gandhi, for instance, was dead against English, and he had some very harsh things to say in Hind Swaraj, his very radical book, Hind Swaraj. He said, to give millions a knowledge of English is to enslave them. The foundation that Macaulay laid of education has enslaved us. If this state of things continues for a long time, posterity will, it is my firm opinion, condemn and curse us. Is it not a painful thing that if I want to go to a court of justice, I must employ English as a medium? And that when I become a barrister, I may not speak my mother language, and that somebody else should have to translate to me from my own language? Is this not absolutely absurd? Is it not a sign of slavery? Am I to blame the English for it, or myself? It is we, the English-knowing Indians, that have enslaved India. The curse of the nation will rest not upon the English, but upon us. So very clearly said, it encapsulates some of the things that I've been trying to say. And then you had, of course, the great Bengali novelist Bankim, who wrote his first novel. The first novel he wrote, and it was in fact the first Indian English novel written by an Indian, Raj Mohan's wife. But then, Bankim was intelligent enough to understand that his novel was not really shaping up very well. And he rejected English thereafter. And subsequently, all his writing, Bengali fiction writing, he did in Bangla. And Michael Madhusudan, that was another great Bengali poet who first wrote in English. And then he rejected English and started writing in Bangla. And this is a situation that has happened all over the world. Wherever you have countries that were under former British rule, there have been people who have supported and opposed. One of the most extreme opposers has been the Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who may win the Nobel one of these days. He actually has gone to the extreme of rejecting English. And he has a very interesting paper or an essay on the abolition of the English department. He says that English department should be abolished in Kenya because English departments are one of the last bastions of colonial values. So my point then is that very many Indians, great Indians, have been dead against English. But then, as I said right at the beginning, displacing English is easier said than done. And Gandhi himself is an interesting case. Gandhi was against the use of English between Indians and advocated Hindi or Hindustani as a linked language. He realized, of course, that India was a multilingual country and that you needed a common language. So he advocated Hindi or Hindustani. And he was a consistent man, so he wrote in his mother tongue. He didn't write in English, which he clearly understood was the colonizer's tongue. But though he wrote in his mother tongue, he also made it a point to translate his Gujarati writings into English. You see, Gandhi, being a very intelligent man, and though he was a saint, he was also a very practical man. So he understood very clearly that if he wrote in Gujarati, his readership would be confined to the state of Gujarat or to Gujarati-speaking people. But then he wanted to communicate with the rest of India. And it was very important that he should do that. So what he did was he translated his Gujarati writings into English. Sometimes he didn't have time, and then he would give it to his assistants. His autobiography, for instance, famous autobiography, was translated into English by his secretary, Mahadev Desai, under Gandhi's supervision. So what this means is, and I have put it there in red, in other words, Gandhi appropriated English to reach a all India readership. And there are other things about Gandhi that we can talk about. It's not just a question of language, because in his introduction to his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, you will find there he says that somebody asked him that, Gandhi, what are you doing? You're writing an autobiography. But then you are a man who is always talking about Indian culture and Indian traditions. There are no autobiographies in India, in Indian tradition or Indian culture. So why are you writing an autobiography? Autobiographies are egotistic. They are centered on the self. And Gandhi, after saying this, he says, this friend told me these things, and then he gives an answer. He says, I will use the autobiography as a genre or as a form, but then my autobiography is going to be different. And I don't know Gujarati, but I believe he says that his autobiography will be Atma Katha, that is the life of story of a soul, not story of the self. This is where he makes this change. Not a story of the self, but a story of the soul. Then there's another writer, some of you would know this perhaps, who put it quite eloquently, Raja Rao, one of the first Indian English novels, one of the early Indian English novels, 1938, that means in the colonial era itself. He said, the telling has not been easy. He's talking about the novel that he has written, Kantapura. He says it was not easy to write. But then you know what he says? He doesn't call his novel novel. He stresses that it is a contemporary Sthala Purana. That means he stresses the links his novel has with India's storytelling culture. And about English, he says, it is not really an alien language to us. We are all instinctively bilingual, many of us writing in our own language and in English. We cannot write like the English. We should not. We can only write as Indians. So like Gandhi, Raja Rao too has an accepting, qualified approach to English, that we cannot give up English and we cannot write like the English, but we can write as Indians. So you can, in other words, he's talking about ownership of the language. We can use it and write as Indian. So what Gandhi and Raja Rao did, what we were involved in what I call the appropriation of English for their own purposes, not for colonial purposes. Now, the fact that our higher education is carried on in English has led to a situation where you have now 993 universities and 39,931 colleges. So that's something like 40,000 or more than 40,000 higher education institutes in India. All of that, or most of that education is conducted in English. Research is conducted in English. And it has led to this situation. In a recent article in Nature, the vice chairman of UGC noted that in 2015, India contributed more than 1/3 of the papers in predatory journals. A lot of this is because of the imposition of English. And you know that right now, UGC is in damage control mode, and that is why you have the care list. Now, why did this happen? See, research involves writing, descriptive writing, even in the sciences, and even more so in the humanities and social sciences, you have to do some descriptive writing. And then what do you do when you have students whose language skills are poor? Because not everyone has equal access to English. And I did say right in my first slide that many of our students in the universities now are first-generation learners, and there will be more in the future. First-generation learners, the first people in their families to enter a university. So students from that kind of background, what will they do? Well, they will copy-paste. They do not have the confidence to write. So they fall back on copy-paste, and they will lift entire passages, change a word here and there, a sentence here, a sentence there. And that amounts to plagiarism. And so UGC now has made it mandatory for you to have a research ethics paper in which you are also enlightened about the problem of plagiarism. Now, today we are not in a colonized world, we are in a globalized world. Now, what has happened is something very unexpected happened, that people thought that with the end of the British Empire, the English would wither away. In India earlier, Persian enjoyed the same prestige and was used in offices and for official work in the way that English is now used. But then Persian died out with the end of the Mughal Empire. So, there is always a connection with economics and with power. So it was expected that English, once the British go away, and the British are now anyway the second-rate power, they're a second-rate nation now, people did think that English would wither away. That hasn't happened. Unexpectedly, English has actually gained strength. And that has happened because of globalization. The rise of globalization and modern communications has led to a situation where English is arguably more powerful than it was in the heyday of empire. Somebody on the internet in Russia communicating with somebody on the internet in Japan will be using English, maybe not Queen's English or King's English, but English. So this is what's happened. This is a new situation that we have, totally unexpected. And so if you're going to keep English, the challenge is that can English be taught without reinforcing colonial and elitist values? We have seen its roots in colonialism, in a colonial program. Now, can we today in post-colonial India teach English without bringing in that colonial heritage, the legacy, the baggage? And all of this was debated. There's been no lack of debates about this. And right at the beginning, when in the Constituent Assembly debates, which went on from 1946 to 1950, what we are talking about today, much of this was being discussed actually. And Ambedkar, great champion of the Dalits, he supported English because he thought that English is the best bet for the Dalits. Because with Sanskrit, there were problems. Because traditionally, Dalits have been shut out from Sanskrit. And he thought English, in a sense, offered greater hopes for a better future. So he supported Dalit for the English, for the Dalit cause, he supported English. And there was strong opposition to Hindi from South India because they thought that Hindi would become another imperial kind of language imposed on the South. And, I have a small bit there. Some years ago, the Dalits actually came up with the Dalit goddess of English. I was trying to trace this recently. I don't find much mention of it now. But there was a Dalit activist, Chandra Bhan Prasad, who actually came up with a Dalit goddess of English, roughly modeled on the Statue of Liberty. And his argument was that if you shut out Dalits from English, then you are denying them an opportunity to rise up the ladder. So connection of English with social mobility. Now, when we decide, and it has been done, Bengal did it, for instance, under communist rule, when Bengal decided that, education would be in Bengali at the primary school level. Okay, but then this is what we call a paternal approach, where you, without consulting people, you decide what is good for people, and then you impose this. So this is another problem that we've had. And universities and colleges are changing, no longer places for the elite. Students now come from colleges, schools and colleges where English is not spoken or taught with any competence. So many of the students that we teach, not in English class, but also in physics class or in chemistry class or in some other subject, they have poor language skills. And it's a real problem for them, because not having access to English or not being proficient in English would actually affect their careers. So we have a responsibility to teach English better. But then, of course, when you teach English, you're always wondering whether you are strengthening colonial values. So then now what do? Can we abandon our lingering colonial misgivings about English and look at it pragmatically, like generations of Indians had done, as a language of education and opportunity? See, many Indians have used English to rise in life. You see, Raja Ram Mohan Roy is at the head of that. Hindu colleges at the beginning of that. So all those people who clamored for English, they were not unpatriotic or stupid. They were actually quite smart, and for them, English was something that led to a better job. So today we talk about placements. So English was very important for them, And today it's probably easier to learn English because of YouTube and their various apps and aids online. And there is evidence that Indians outside the school system, outside the college system, outside the university system, are trying to improve the English language skills. For instance, there is a book, Norman Lewis's Word Power Made Easy. Just check out this book, how many copies it sells every year. Now, this is not a book that would be allowed to cross the threshold of any English department. But Indians are attempting to learn English. And these Indians know very well. You see, when your driver sends his son or daughter to an English medium school, it's because he knows he wants the same future for his children as your children. See, so there is a reason why people go for English. All right, the next 2 points are suppose not very important. These are my own pet complaints that I have, that I find that a lot of my younger colleagues are not very keen on teaching English in English departments. They would rather do theory. So there's a certain amount of snobbery associated with this idea. I can dwell on this later on if you ask me a question about it. And our mass culture, popular culture reflects our anxieties about not knowing English. You have Amitabh Bachchan and Namak Halal saying English is a very funny language because it's very difficult to master for many Indians. And in films like Chupke Chupke, which is an old film, but more recently you had English of English, taking up this theme of English, the effect of not knowing English on Indians. Because I'm from Assam, I'm always interested in this idea, in knowing when exactly English became a language of aspiration in the Northeast. And I found that you can trace it to about 1869. I found a letter from the missionaries. And the missionaries, the Baptist missionaries, the Protestant missionaries particularly, always wanted to do their preaching in the local language. Okay, they were committed to that, preaching in the local language. So in Assam, the problem arose that how do you do our preaching? And he found that actually people were preferring, already in 1869, preferring English over Assamese. And what happened in Assam happened about 2 generations earlier, because Hindu College, remember, was set up in 1817. So this slide is basically about the Northeast. So then I am coming to the end of my talk, which I've gone on for almost an hour now, and I have to make some space for your questions. Can we learn from the example of the Dalits and that of generations of Indians in the past who learned English for career reasons, no more, no less? There should be a question mark after this. And then, can there be now a more hopeful and pragmatic phase about the role of English in our higher education institutions, or universities? So that is my final slide, I think. Yes. So thank you so much for your patience. And I'm now making myself available for any questions that you might have.
So we have questions from the participants who have live questions while YouTube streaming. So first of all, I would like to take those questions first. There are so many questions. So participants, right now, no need to unmute your microphone. You just listen to the questions and search interaction. The first question is from Sampan Chakraborty. All the persons of this Anglicist Orientalist controversy were Englishmen. Was there any Indian academician allowed? Sir, I have just copied the questions in the chat box from YouTube. You can just open the chat box also.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yes,
I'll do that. Yeah,
this is the first question. All
right, so I have opened my chat box here. Yeah, so to take up your question, the question that you asked, were any Indians involved in that Orientalist Anglicist controversy? Not really, because those colonial times. So not in the formal debate that went on, but as I have indicated, there were also alliances between Englishmen and Indians. So people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy were quite influential and also were listened to, not that they were not listened to. So there were people like that on the Indian side, But the actual debate was an official debate because it eventually became an official debate because Macaulay was asked to intervene and to provide a solution. So at that point, Macaulay, I don't think, felt the need to consult any Indian. But prior to that, when Hindu College was set up, there were groups. It was as a result of Englishmen and also Indians, prominent Indians like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and others, whose efforts led to the establishment of Hindu College. So yeah. Okay. Let me see. Should I take the questions on the chat box?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm taking it serially. Jintu Hoikya. There was something before that? Just sorry. Okay, hold on. Yeah, okay, from the beginning. Yeah, I've taken that one. I think that was from Sampan Chakraborty, about the Anglicist. Yeah, Rintu. Yeah, Rintu. Sorry. Yeah, Wood's dispatch, this is from Rintu Hoikya. She's Hendik, sorry. She says, due to the Anglicist classicist controversy, our education stagnated for 40 years, up to Wood's dispatch. Actually, higher education did not stagnate because the controversy was resolved with the English Education Act. It became an act. So English became a medium of instruction in higher education. But there was some realization that this is maybe a bit too extreme. And what about lower education, primary education, and so on and so forth? So Wood's dispatch gave some space to vernacular education. But I don't think it stagnated. In fact, it settled the problem. Till that point, there was some uncertainty about what medium to use in these new universities. But then the universities or any institution of higher education, Wood's dispatch, I think, came later on. But before that, already Macaulay had settled it. Not stagnation, I think. In fact, the opposite happened. The opposite happened. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, there's an important question that you're asking here. that was Macaulay neutral. Absolutely not. I quoted him, and Macaulay is somebody that we love to hate even now, because some of the things that he said really make your blood boil after all these years, because he didn't know any of the Indian languages. He didn't have much knowledge of Indian culture, but he was very dismissive. He said there's nothing there. There's nothing there. So that really hurts us even now. So he was definitely not a neutral person, not a neutral person at all. He was completely biased in favor of the Anglicist position. Okay, I'm coming to the next question. Gargi Gan would like to know your opinion regarding the effectiveness of the three-language policy in a multilingualistic state like Assam. That is the problem. The thing is that we, unlike European countries, we are multilingual. See, multilingual. In Europe, you have monolingual countries, so they don't have these issues. Even China, which is a vast, very big country, they still have some kind of standard Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. Okay. In India, the problem is that you have so many languages, and you can see this as a weakness or you can see it as a strength. Many Indians in the past and even today see it as a weakness, that they think that the more languages there are, the more differences, more identity problems. But you can also see it in a different way, and you can see it like we look at diversity in the natural world. Okay, so at one time we believed in monoculture. Today there's a realization that diversity, we value diversity. We preserve rainforests. Why? Because of the diversity of species that you have there. So it's a strength, it's richness, it adds to richness. You can see it that way. Now about the three-language policy in Assam, as I said, it's easy to talk about displacing English, but then what do you bring in its place? And English has at least some kind of acceptance, some kind of neutrality it has, simply because it's come from abroad. So there is, as I said, I also said that, mind you, I don't have many answers to this problem. And one reason why we've continued with English is also because of this situation, where, you have, you want to bring up something in play to replace English, but then that arouses the suspicion of other communities. That is this another way of imposing something on us. And because language has always been associated with imposition, with power. It's usually, if you are a more powerful community, then you're in a position to impose your language on others. As has happened in Assam, in Assamese to some extent has been imposed on communities. Hindi, it can be imposed on us. But smaller communities do not have that same license or the same ability to impose, or to do the reverse kind of, in fact, many languages are dying out. So I think three-language formula, I think so. In a country, in a place like Assam, and particularly children are very quick at picking up language. This is something that linguists know very well, and others also know it. Children, especially in a younger first few years, human beings have an astonishing ability to process language. Children will pick up language very fast. So maybe I think it's the right solution. I do think so. Okay, Pranami Bhattacharya. Yeah, she has a question about in Africa, there has been a lot of debate about language, and people have articulated their positions very, very powerfully and very efficiently. Not so in Indian writing in English. She's asking, because if you look at all the Indian writers in English, very few of them have actually tackled that problem. Raja Rao we talked about, but there are not too many like that. People who have reflected on the anomaly of using English for creative purposes. The Africans have done it, maybe because Africa was also an oral culture largely. Maybe, and so in their case, colonialism was more damaging, perhaps. But yeah, this is a striking fact. When you come to Indian writing in English, you find that you do not have the equivalent of Django or Achibi, people who have reflected on using the colonizer's language, not to the same extent. You don't find that. Yes, it's something that I do mention in my Indian writing classes also. Okay.
Sir, I will read the next question from YouTube. The question is asked by Zuma Das. Do you think English language at present society can really pose threat for other language to exist in countries like India?
Can you say that again? Repeat that.
Do you think English language at present society can really pose threat for other languages to exist in countries like India?
Yes, yes. See, another problem, that disturbing problem, is that it's like English. I said that we are multilingual. Many of us are bilingual. You speak Assamese or whatever language. If you're Assamese, if you're Bengali, you speak Bengali, and then you speak English. You also know Hindi. So I said that we are bilingual, or we know 2-3 languages. But even that is not actually. If you go to see, if you examine, you will find that in many cases, what is happening is that you speak in Assamese, yes, but your sentence structures are influenced by English. Grammatical structures are influenced by English. You are properly bilingual when the two languages are independent. You have equal proficiency in Assamese and in English, say. But then what many of us actually don't know all the numbers. If you ask me to tell, go up 1, 2, 3, 4 like that in Assamese, at some point I'll start using English. So what has happened is that English has taken over. It's a bit like those invasive plant species, water hyacinth in India, in our ponds. They don't let other species prosper. So that is the problem. That is the problem. Had we been even properly bilingual, it would have been okay. But English seems to be invading our other languages. And so you have anglicized Assamese, anglicized Bengali. Sentence structures are borrowed from, grammatical structures are borrowed from English. So this is a problem that you have. Yeah.
So there is questions in YouTube and also in chat box. Due to lack of time, we will not be able to answer all those questions. So can we do one thing, that we will send you all the questions and you will write back to us, and then we will post those answers in our Google Classroom?
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. And
I'm taking one more question from you. How does the NEP is expected to answer the debate among English, Hindi, and any other vernacular language, whether more debatable issues relating to conflict between languages emerge in coming days?
See, the NEP faces the same problem that previous reformers have faced. There have been attempts to reform Indian education. But then many of the things I said in my talk should give you a sense of the problems that are involved in replacing English or diminishing the influence of English. What we can do is perhaps diminish the influence of English. And I think that is what gradually diminish. That is, I think, what the national education policy is aiming at. We can't obviously overnight reject and throw out English, but gradually diminish its importance. But then, sometimes you talk about these things at the policy level, but then at the level of practice, what happens? I'll tell you what happens. Right now you have the UGC care list. The UGC care list is perfectly fine if you belong to the sciences. What happens if you belong to one of the modern Indian languages, Hindi, Assamese, Bengali? There are not that many journals. See, there are very good journals in Bengali, for instance. I know excellent journals that have been there for over 100 years. They're not represented in the UGC care list. So when you do your research, it will not be recognized. You're not rewarded as a professional because you know how important the UGC care list is. So we have many anomalies like that. You see, a policy paper can be consistent in its positions, but at the practical level, there are problems like that. So English has become so intertwined with our, and not only that, in fact, the care list is a good example of how much, not just English, but the Western perceptions and Western ways of doing have led to a situation where today, if you may write an excellent paper in Bengali and publish it in, say, some journal in Bengal, and what will happen? You will not be read by your peers, and even UGC will not reward you. So you see, there is a very, very radical kind of change that is required, and I don't see that happening at all. I don't know if I've answered that question properly. or whether I got the answer, question at all. But yeah, but one of the things that is clear, if there's so many questions, is that English is of concern, as I said, not only just to English departments, anybody involved in higher education, and if you are committed to those goals of making English, making education something that is meaningful, then I think you would have to confront the question of the dominance of English in Indian higher education.
We know that there are so many questions and you would like to interact with her. It would have been a day-long webinar exactly on this topic particularly. But please, we seek apology to all of you because we are running out of time, and we'll take up your questions and we will send those questions to sir. And when sir will get back to us with the answers, we will post all the answers in Google Classroom. So thank you all of you for your overwhelming questions and responses and your active participation in this session. And sir would also have, I'm sure that sir would also be delighted to take your questions to answer. And with these words, would like to thank Professor P.K.Das sir, who is so kind to us and always responded to our invitations to take any questions that we requested to him. Thank you so much, and would like to conclude this session here, and we will get back to you with the answers that will be responded by sir. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Next session.
We will share the link of our next session very soon.